name is Candace. Thank you for coming back to my channel. You're gonna hear a lot of background noise because the cats are just going insane, so just try to deal, and I'm really sorry. But today I wanted to talk about the stigma of mental illnesses in the world, and there are so many, and there doesn't need to be a stigma because it's nothing to be ashamed of. So I'm not a mental illness professional. I'm not an expert. This is just stuff that I've researched and I live on a daily basis because I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, ADHD, major depression, and generalized anxiety. But if you don't know what a stigma is, then I'm going to be reading, so excuse me. But verywellmind.com has given a great definition. Stigma involves negative attitudes or discrimination against someone based on a distinguishing characteristic such as a mental illness, health condition, or disability. Social stigma can also be related to other characteristics including gender, sexuality, race, religion, and culture. And research has shown that stigma is one of the leading risk factors contributing to poor mental health outcomes. Stigma leads to delays in treatment. It also reduces the chances that a person with mental illness will receive appropriate and adequate care. And I know that for a fact because it's almost like we're made to feel ashamed that our brain isn't wired correctly. And I don't understand why. It's nothing to be ashamed about. But ncbi.org says studies showed that schizophrenia is the most stigmatized mental illnesses in the mental health world, despite recent results suggesting that borderline personality disorder and substance abuse may be more stigmatized. So it's kind of sad that people with substance abuse and people with borderline and schizophrenia, we get judged more because of the way our brain works. And obviously it's not fair, but it's just not okay. Especially because a lot of people don't actually understand what these disorders are. And I know that the dissociative identity disorder, which is basically like multiple personalities, that also is just completely misunderstood. And it's stuff that people need to look into if they're going to talk about it. Instead of just saying like, oh, well, I saw this on a movie, that's how they act. And media analysis of film and I'm so sorry, I'm so blind. Media analysis of film and print have identified 3 people with mental illness are homicidal maniacs who need to be feared. They have childlike perceptions of the world that should be marveled. Are they responsible for their illness because they have a weak character? It kind of doesn't matter what mental illness it is. People are going to think that of you regardless. It's always going to be the mental illness that did something and not the person itself. While the mental illness is a part of us, it's not who we are, and we can get help even if things can't be cured. There is help. And according to children and adults with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or CHAD, some of the myths against ADHD are, it isn't a real disorder. It only affects children and not adults. It only affects boys, or it isn't as severe in girls in women, that it's diagnosed too often. And, or bad parenting leads to ADHD. Or people with ADHD are over medicated because people don't want to drug up their kids because they don't know enough about ADHD, which is sad because so many kids get diagnosed with that and then they get average grades or they act up in school or they don't fit in. But the parent either refuses to get them tested or they refuse to give them medication. And it's sad because I was one of those kids. I got very average grades, like C's, and I was always quiet. I didn't feel like I fit in, which ADHD also, along with the borderline personality, because I've had that since I was a child. And it's just, I wonder how much easier life would have been if I had been diagnosed ADHD when I was a child rather than when I was 26. Because now I'm medicated and it's a lot better. I still kind of crazy, but it has helped me focus, and while I still have problems multitasking and just the normal issues, it's a lot better on medication. But just ways that you can help deal with the stigma. So some of you people who may not have mental illness, but you would like to learn more about it, or you would like to help it become more normalized to speak about it. Just know that it's nothing to be ashamed about. Don't doubt yourself. Get treatment. If you think something's wrong, get treatment. You're not attention seeking, nothing like that. And that's one of the big things also is, I know as a teenager, I had a lot of issues. Just with hurting myself and just completely just not being a normal teenager. But every time that I would tell an adult, it would be, well, you just want attention because your sister, blah, 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 or your mom, or blah, 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 or somebody, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, why can't I just be depressed because I'm depressed, instead of it having to be me wanting attention? And that's the reason that these rates and these percentages of depression and harming themselves is so high. Because if it happens as teenagers, preteen, children, it's mostly looked at as attention seeking. And that is very sad, because that's what leads to your child no longer being here. Also, just, I have problems with this one even now with treatment and knowing that I'm not ashamed of my mental illnesses. You're not supposed to isolate yourself. You're supposed to reach out to your friends, family. If you know somebody who has depression or mental illness, make sure that they're okay. Don't just be like, hey, call me if you need me, or text me if anything happens. Reach out to them, because they're not going to call you. They're not going to text you. Don't equate yourself with your illness. That's something that I had trouble with when I was first diagnosed, is I'm borderline. Instead of saying I have borderline personality. And like I said before, it shapes who you are as a person, but it shouldn't define you. And support groups are always great. And that's for friends and family of people with mental illnesses, people with mental illnesses. I know I've done like depression groups, I've done peer support groups for veterans, I've done, right now I'm doing cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as I've done dialectical behavioral therapy as well in a group. And it helps a lot more than you think it does. And the biggest thing, speak out against stigma. That's the most important thing. But the National Alliance on Mental Illness, they just kind of sum it up perfectly. No matter how you contribute to the mental health movement, you can make a difference simply by knowing that mental illness is not anyone's fault, no matter what societal stigma says. It's not your fault that you have schizophrenia. It's not your fault you have borderline personality disorder. It's not your fault you have ADHD. It's not your fault. And PTSD, I have that too. It's not your fault. You can't control these things. You can manage them to help control them, but you can't control that you have it. And that kind of doesn't make sense, but in my brain it does. But I think that's one of the biggest things is we need to stop making people feel ashamed or embarrassed about it. Because it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I know that sometimes I do still struggle with anxiety attacks. Like if I go pretty much anywhere, anybody tries to talk to me, even like outside of my apartment, I will get anxiety attacks. But it's something that, and it's something that if I tried to kind of manage, then I wouldn't be getting these, because I used to be able to go out and do a lot of things and only have panic attacks occasionally. But now it's like, since I don't leave my house because my car is busted, so I can't really leave my house unless I want to pay out of the ass for an Uber, which I'm not doing that because everything can be delivered. But if I ever go to the store or anything like that now, I have to go super late at night, like about 30 to 45 minutes before they close. So there's not as many people. And I'm not ashamed of that. It's really annoying, honestly. Having these things is really annoying and it's frustrating. And so it's difficult. But if you are a loved one is having issues with any kind of mental illness whatsoever, whether they need to go get help, whether they need to be diagnosed, or whether they really need help, be there for them, support them, learn about what's going on. Try to understand rather than judge. And I know that there are so many movies that portray certain mental illnesses in such a bad light. And unfortunately, even some psychiatrists and some doctors will refuse to accept some personality disorders because they think negative thoughts about them. Because people with borderline personality disorder We are supposed to be known as manipulative. We lie about everything. We twist everything so that we're never wrong. It's always somebody else's fault. And we're violent. That we have rage issues. And just, I don't know how else to say it, but insane. Because it's just very hurtful. And there's so many articles out there even that will talk about if your family member has this disorder, run. Don't try to help them. Don't try to do anything. They're just bad. And I remember, because I was working on my bachelor's in psychology, and I have about 2 semesters left. I remember in one course, and I didn't tell anybody, obviously, that I was diagnosed as borderline personality. But this will always stick in my head, even though it's been almost a decade at this point. She said, if you learn somebody has either narcissistic personality or they're borderline, don't be friends with them. I wish I was lying. She literally said that to the class. You know what I did? I have borderline personality disorder. She got very red-faced. But it's just like, that's what they're teaching people. And it's sad. We're still people. We're not monsters. We're not these horrible beings that deserve to be alone and feared. And it's frustrating. But I think that's all I'm going to talk about today, because that was just kind of a lot. And some of it was being read, and then some of it was just like random thoughts that pop up, because yay, unnormal brains. But I hope you enjoyed this, and hope that you got a little bit of information. And hopefully this helps. And after this, I will put up all the sources, the websites that I got some of these quotes from and stuff. Then also, I'm going to put up some websites that you can get help, whether it's through therapy or just like anonymous, just talking to somebody else, or just whatever. I'm going to put some websites up too. So I will see you in a few days. So bye. Or what is that fucking word? Disclaimer out there. I'm not a physical, I just said physical. Based on a distinguishing characteristic such as a mental illness, health condition,